Welcome to the Thursday Pivot and the SHifT show. And today we're talking about Spooky Shift with DanWoo from Grant Thornton. I, as a business owner, have a couple of major fears in my life, and bankruptcy insolvency is one of them. And CRA is like the godfather of that little trio of insolvency, bankruptcy, and tax evasion. So I'm really pleased to have you join us today, Dan. Can you take us through a little bit about how you got involved in being a trustee? How long have you been with Grant Thornton, and a little bit of background there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a CPA and licensed insolvency trustee. I've been with Grant Thornton 3.5 years now. I made the move over from a Big Four firm in order to head up the corporate insolvency and restructuring practice here at Grant Thornton in Edmonton. How I kind of came into this field is that my older sister is also a licensed trustee in Toronto, and she kind of led me into the field here 14 years ago, and I haven't turned back.
You know, so many people I've talked to over the last few weeks, when I've mentioned that you are going to be coming on, Grant Thornton goes from one coast to the other, quite well known in the field of what you do. What made you focus on that trustee work over perhaps staying as in the accounting side?
Yeah, so with the trustee work, I get to see some immediate gratification, if you will, working with individual debtors as well as with corporate debtors to go over all the options available to them, both on an informal and formal basis, and to give them some peace of mind in respect of any type of assistance that we can kind of give them. So, from that front, it's been, magical, if you will, and that's we get to help small business and individuals on a daily basis that are struggling, especially in these kind of times today.
We talked earlier about communication being paramount in these situations. Take us through why, when you're working with that small business owner on that communication side.
Yeah, so during these kind of critical times, that the one certainty is that there's uncertainty. So if you're dealing with various stakeholders in respect of your business, whether it's banks, the CRA, trade payables, employees, etc., it's definitely important to kind of communicate, as it gives people comfort that you're not just burying your head in the sand and ignoring any type of issues.
So outside of this unprecedented year of 2020, how does a client typically come to you? I'm sure that there's a huge sphere of people who are perhaps concerned, to those that are feet are in the fire and they're on flames. What is the commonality from one to the other of clients that you see coming through the door?
Yeah, so that's correct, right? Usually, the earlier we get involved, the more options we're able to assist you with. Sometimes, because you're so late in the game, looking for professional advice, that there's really very little that can be done. Our work typically comes from two methods, if you will. One that is creditor driven, and that's a financial institution or lender may approach us about a client that they have, and looking for assistance or options available to either turn around the business or else look at an orderly exit with the financial institution. The second side is the debtor side, where a debtor will call up or else be referred from a lawyer, perhaps. My client is in this industry having this difficulties. Can you chat with them to kind of assess the situation and go over the options available with them?
What are some of the forerunners that a business owner can see, or perhaps like the professionals in the room here, when they're working with clients, that they can start to spot those early warning signs and get ahead of what could be a disruption for the business on a go-forward basis?
Yeah, great question. So during these times, things like if you're stretching payables out for working capital purposes, if you're not making your remittances to our friends at the CRA, that's always a big one. If you're, defaulting on either loan payments or else requesting extensions with your lender, these are all usually type of indicators that there's some compression happening with the business, and that whether it's an operational review or else a financial workout needs to probably be considered.
When we were talking before, we talked a lot about communication and some people feeling like they've reached the end, but you have said and reiterated several times, it's not the end. Lots of times that banks are willing to have those conversations.
Yeah, we work with every financial institution here in Canada, and I'd have to say the general consensus is that they're willing to work with their customers, right? Because we're all in the same boat right now. No one has a crystal ball. Typically, everyone's revenue has been impacted, and it's just a matter of what is the plan here to try and keep the bank support with you throughout this period. And that comes with, an open and frank discussion as to where your company's at, what efforts are you taking or will be taking, and what does the future look like, even though it's a little uncertain.
Now let's pull it into this year. Now we have this unprecedented year. And when you and I first spoke, there was the expectation that once the government programming stops or trickles to an end, that there would be a reckoning. Are you seeing that? Are you expecting to see that soon? What are you seeing come through the door?
Again, speaking with lenders, they're being very patient right now because no one wants to cause a mass panic needlessly. So, there are multiple sectors that we're working in that are really challenged right now. So, retail, hospitality, tourism, restaurants, some professional services, construction, and not-for-profits. So each one is in a very unique situation, and it's a matter of assessing your own business, figuring out what the next steps are. Typically, we'll work with companies to prepare a cash flow forecast for lenders to kind of give them, hey, this is the worst case scenario, this is the best case scenario, and this is going to be the likely scenario. As you can see, when we reach to this point, the company is going to turn around, provided all of our assumptions come to fruition. So, it's really understanding your own business and what the key triggers are in order to make it viable here during this kind of unprecedented time.
What do you see happening, Dan, when the government programming does eventually come to an end?
Unfortunately, like every type of major disruption throughout time, some business, quite honestly, are not going to make it. In speaking with people in business every single day, if you don't have any type of pipeline of work and you're telling me that you have zero revenue opportunities, chances are that you're not going to be able to refinance unless you perhaps have some type of family support or other type of investor willing to assist. So, there will be some casualties, but certainly businesses that do survive will be stronger for it in the future.
And lender fatigue, you're saying that the lenders are still being really patient, but I had never even considered lender fatigue, right? How much risk are they willing to take on and for how long?
Yeah, so lender fatigue from my perspective as a restructuring professional typically relates to companies that may have been in trouble already pre-pandemic that the banks have been trying to work with, and as a result of the pandemic, their opportunities have been even more challenged. So, lenders typically want to know, what is the plan? Asking the company, right? How are you going to turn this out? How are you going to exit this relationship, whether it's refinancing or etc. So, to carte blanche say that lenders are having fatigue dealing with business, I think is a little false, but certainly for some business that have already been in the system for a while, they're facing an uphill battle.
Yeah, and I did not mean to indicate at all that it was carte blanche or anything. It's here in Alberta. we've just gone through a lot the last decade, between the fires and the floods and the downturn and the oil patch and the where do we go next. Sometimes this just seems like a straw that breaks the camel's back. But you started us off by saying, you know what, we're really resilient. And I would have to say that, you would know because you're seeing people perhaps at their most vulnerable.
Hmm. Yeah, like people are looking at recreating their business every single day. I've worked with a company in the manufacturing business, and they've expanded into the production of PP&E, and quite honestly, that's been a godsend for them, and that's great margins and the items that they produce, very strong demand. So it's they're a success story, let's call it. As well, with every disruption, there's always opportunity, right? So, if you are potentially a strategic acquisition for either a customer that you're a key supplier for, or even a competitor, right? There are options available, and they should be explored during this time.
So you must work very closely with business valuators in seeing what can be salvaged from a company in order for sale. Am I
Yeah, absolutely.
making the right assumption?
So our advisory group here is full service. So we deal with transactions, M&A, corporate finance, business consulting, business risk services like cybersecurity, et cetera. So we're working with a company now that the right play is to divest off of a large division that is lucrative and will yield a great return in order to pay down debt. So again, when a business advisor is kind of brought in, all avenues are reviewed in order to review all the options available.
Well, I think people are definitely having to be creative, and a lot of people that are suffering are taking advantage of the government subsidies. It'll be interesting to see, especially the people who are directly impacted. So, the fitness facilities, that sort of thing. They're a little nervous. I know I've taken a lot of calls to say, I think I'm going to have to go down the bankruptcy route. But people are taking the opportunity to really sit back and take a look at their operations just to see what the opportunities are.
I think they're, from an outsider's perspective, but working in benefits, I'd like to see a lot more manufacturing come back to Canada. I'd like to see those pivots. How many companies are you seeing that are using the opportunity to, almost like a freedom, right? I now have the freedom to pivot and move into something else. Are you seeing those kinds of clients come your way as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Every avenue is explored, right? And if you're an entrepreneur at heart, people keep telling me I will find a way to make my business viable, and if it means branching out into other non-traditional type of areas, they're happy to look into those and invest in those opportunities. As well, there are always consolidators at this time, right? That's the big get bigger, if you will. That's are also looking for opportunities to increase their market share.
We do see that, don't we? You see the consolidation of things coming together, and then you see contract, and people. We went through that. Is certainly here in Alberta over the last couple of decades, where you have these big companies, and then you have all of the individual practitioners that incorporate and spin off onto their own companies. What's a typical turnaround strategy? So say somebody comes into the door, does all the right things, you have the lenders on board, and now you're ready to let that little chicken fly. Even though chickens don't fly, but I get the metaphor. What does the turnaround strategy look like typically? What's a good news story?
Yeah, so a good news story is obviously where they're able to either address their debts and creditors informally. If there is a wide range of creditors, it's usually a little bit more challenging than if you're an operator that has 5 or 6 key creditors. With restructurings under either the Bankruptcy Insolvency Act or the Company Creditors Arrangement Act, we're able to compromise formally certain creditor claims or debts in order to allow a viable business to continue. And if that does occur, then it's away you are off to the races, and it's business as usual, right? Just to meet the terms of either your proposal or else your plan of arrangement to creditors.
Do you often see repeated people come back to you?
Me personally, not usually. So success stories, certainly there are lots, but for me personally, no. But I do know of other trustees that have worked on companies, multiple times, let's call it.
What happens when somebody does file for bankruptcy? Well, how does that impact their ability to even start over again?
Yeah, so if a company assigns itself into bankruptcy, there are potential implications, if you will, depending on the nature of the tax debt owing to the Canada Revenue Agency. So once a bankruptcy is filed, there's what's called a stay of proceedings, such that creditors can't take their own kind of self-help remedies, and it muddies the water. So a trustee is in effect responsible for all the property of the bankrupt corporation and will deal with all creditor claims on a priority basis that's established in the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. So what's corporate owners and directors should be aware of are directors' liability for trust funds. So that would be things like payroll source deductions and GST collected but not remitted. So even though a company is bankrupt, if there aren't sufficient assets to pay those out, there may be personal exposure if you're a director of a corporation. As well as in business, if there's a failure, you'll also want to check any personal guarantees that have been provided, as you may have, again, personal exposure in that respect. And again, we're noticing that, a lot of businesses and suppliers are getting crafty. So if you enter into credit arrangements, especially in construction, we're noting that they name both the company as well as the individual as co-borrowers under that particular application, such that, again, you may have some personal exposure from any unpaid corporate debts.
That sounds to me like it would be very difficult for, especially in the construction industry, that if you have gone down that road, to try to start business again in a couple of years would be tough unless you were personally financing those things.
Yeah, that's right. And usually we refer parties to insolvency lawyers that are able to help you structure your affairs in order to, whether it's give you the best protection or insulation from potential creditor claims.
I was talking to a gentleman a couple of weeks ago after you and I had met, and the conversation came up, and he said, the almost bankruptcy changed his life because he was able to work with folks at Grant Thornton who helped do that restructuring, get the lenders on board. And he said there was a real sense of freedom because it streamlined and brought into focus all those business practices, strategies, and procedures that should have been in place the first time. And that's more than 30 years ago now. And, his business began to thrive almost immediately by doing the work up front. And as he said, better late than never. I'm like, well, you've been successful for the last 30 years. Maybe it was just the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. We do this every single day for a living. So we're well versed with strategies that can be utilized in certain circumstances, as well as we have excellent relations with, all financial institutions and lenders. And, when Grant Thornton throws its name behind it, there's credibility there.
So what am I forgetting to ask you? I'm not an expert in this field. So maybe Angela, you can pop in, or Frank or Melanie, but what am I forgetting to ask you? What's a main message that needs to be out there to business owners these days in this unprecedented time?
Yeah, one thing I've been noticing is that a lot of people are not, or a lot of business are not availing themselves of the government programs available. Right out of the gate here, that should be something that should be immediately investigated with their business advisors. So things like the CEBA loan, very low threshold to qualify, as long as you're a business that has, expenses that are being incurred during the pandemic. You know, things like the CUES program for the employer wage subsidy program should be investigated as well, right? So these are all opportunities for government incentives to kind of help you keep your head above water during this time until we get back to some point of normalcy, when and if that comes, right? I think business going forward is going to change, and that's you know, even with ourselves here, you know, we have about 20% of staff back in the office over 3 floors. So really, I think businesses will be relooking at how they're going to operate kind of going forward, if you will.
Lighter, tighter, faster, perhaps?
Yeah, exactly. Using technology better, right? So
Well, I can't thank you enough, Dan, for taking the time. It's a big deal to have Grant Thornton come in and provide these insights. I really do appreciate it. And I wanted to thank everybody for coming out today, as always. The whole messaging here, as you know, is to provide this information to business owners so that they know who to turn to and what questions to ask and when to start before the fire takes hold, so to speak. You know, get ahead of it, get that communication, and get control. Guys, go and have a great day. Thank you so much.